Okay, well, nice to have you back here. So today we're going to continue with the Life of Proclus,
Mm-hmm.
and we made it to the end of paragraph 19, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where we were reading about his the hymns and how this and how he, you know, prayed as the philosopher of not a single city or country, but a hierophant of the whole world. And now we still have one or two more paragraphs about the purifying virtues, and then we'll move on to the contemplative ones.
Did we make an online order on all these for tomorrow? Yeah, why not? Yeah, one second. I need to find my document. It's lost now. There you go.
Okay, sure.
Um, um, mm, where did it go? Um, I don't know where it went. You send it to me once here.
Yeah, you want me to send it again?
Yeah, I'm gonna get it again. Yeah, I don't know where it went. Okay.
Oh, you found it?
It says already exists. I don't know why it's not. I need to just do it like this. Hmm. Oh, okay. Oh, that's why. Okay, yeah, I have it.
Okay.
Hey, we're at my page. Tell me the page number in this.
The page number is 88. Um, I mean 88 in the book, in the PD.
Yeah.
Yeah, it should be 88 PDF as well.
Yeah, okay. We're number 20, right?
Exactly, exactly. You want to start reading from there?
Yeah. As for the ailments, okay. As for the ailments, he shunned them. He shunned them. For if they fell on him, he bore them meekly and made them less because the best part of him did not share the suffering. Okay.
Right. Shun is a weird word here in English indeed. But the idea is in Greek is afere, he took them away and will um yeah, and that's like he made them less because the best part of him did not share in them. That's like an expression, that's like an explanation of what the sh of what the shunning is. Since he didn't pay attention to the sicknesses he had, he they didn't really affect him.
Mhm. For oppressed by this as he was, and gripped by pangs, he tried to cast off the ailment. He therefore urged us to chant hymns on each occasion, and as the hymns were chanted, there followed total relief and quiescence of his suffering. And what is more remarkable still than this, he retained the memory for what was said, even though he forgot almost all human things as the paralysis advanced.
Right. So it seems like that at the end of his life, he had this progressive paralysis, and he um, was had no recollection, perhaps, for day-to-day activities. However, he could remember what was said during perhaps these occasions when the he was sick in bed, and people would then come and chant hymns, and also to talk with him, presumably, and so this is um, an example of how he's not paying attention to his to the pain he's suffering. He's just thinking about about the intellectual content that's happening.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Um, this is yeah. Uh, Lifrias.
For as we were
Or
chanting.
as we were chanting and completed the hymns and the greater part of the Orphic verses, for sometimes read these out in his presence. So he remembered, like, I mean, he remembered where it was or something like that.
Yeah, and like perhaps these are things where you read together. One person reads one part of the text, another person reads the other, and he just completes things by memory. He doesn't need the text in
Mhm.
front of him. Right. No.
Um,
And also, this passage explains a bit why all this stuff about about his hymns and his prayers are inside the chapter on purificatory virtues, right? Because they're used in these contexts of healing and so on.
and he maintained this impassibility not only towards the suffering of his body, but even towards external accidents that beset him and happenings that seemed contrary to reason. The
Right.
what are things
So,
contrary to reason?
oh, just, I guess it's things that make people doubt providence or think that, it's like a freak occurrence. Like, why did this bad thing happen to me? From his text on providence, we know that his house burned down. So that would be an example of something that happened. Yeah.
Thus, his response on each of these occasions was, "Things are as they are, things are as ever."
Right. Yeah. The yeah, the Greek is pretty close to that. It's like things are such, things are as they usually are. That's, just also, an expression you could find amongst in a Stoic philosopher as well.
Yeah, that's what it sounded. But what is it? Does it mean something like there is a course of nature and you shouldn't be bothered by it or something?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like there's nothing new under the sun. There's just,
Hmm.
you know.
This dictum seemed to me worthy of remembrance and a sufficient index of the greatness of the philosopher's soul. Hmm.
Right. That's magnanimity, megalopsychia. So this consciousness that the virtuous person has, that they are a virtuous and noble and dignified person. Right. And that also, it's a very, like, this is, Aristotle discusses it, and it's one of the more unchristian, so to speak, virtues that you find in the Nicomachean Ethics, because Aristotle is quite clear that the great souled person separates himself off from people who are mean and vulgar and so on, right? And so it's something that gives Christians a trouble when they have to, fit this in with this idea that, Jesus, he spends time with taxpayers and prostitutes and things like that. Tax collectors, I'm sorry.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, but it's not really in this context, doesn't seem to be connected. Like it's just saying something like, what's,
yeah, he's just like, yeah, like what a noble person this is. He manages to, he's not affected by his bad luck. Yeah.
okay. Um, and he chastened his temper as far as he was able. So I'll remember that he wasn't able fully. So
Yes.
he must have been like, this is the best. Okay. It's a weird thing. Like, this is the best he could do. This is him after chastening his temper. Imagine what would he if he wouldn't be a philosopher. And so that either was not aroused at all, or else the rational soul had no part in his wrath, and the involuntary emotion belonged to the other part, and even then was slight and weak. Hmm.
Right. Right. That's exactly what Porphyry says you should do. Right.
Right.
that ideally you shouldn't feel these things, but if you feel them, it should be involuntary, right? And so,
Right. He was, and I guess there's something like that for anger, just like there is for physical pleasure or things like that.
exactly.
As for the physical pleasure of love, I think he went so far as to partake of them in the imagination, and even this was superficial.
Right. So again, this is exactly what Porphyry says. You should only enjoy these things in your imagination, and again, only without your will, like involuntarily. Yeah. And yeah, and um the Greek means that, the word for superficial can be understood as also outside of your control. Yeah. So, yeah.
And imagination meant something like not not an action or
Yeah, not an action, just like it's fantasia, so it's a representation in your mind.
Mhm.
Remember, he commented earlier about how he was abstinent and he never married, things like that.
Mhm. Okay. And thus, 21.
Hmm.
And thus the soul of the soul of the blessed man, collecting itself from every side and gathering itself within itself, all but departed from the body, even while it seemed to be still detained by it.
Right. This thing of gathering, of the soul gathering itself, remember it has it's a kind of a physical metaphor of what happens when you go to sleep. There was a Stoic idea like the soul pulls back and stays in the heart while you're asleep, and then later it spreads out, and then you're awake. And so Plotinus also used that same image, but basically thinking about what he was doing when he was sick. It's yeah, so the soul was only paying attention to, the words and the hymns and the conversation, and it wasn't at all paying attention to the suffering of his body.
Hmm. Okay. Oops. Right. For its thinking was not the political kind that consists in acting well with regards to matters that could be otherwise, that political virtue, but knowing in itself, pure and simple, a reversion to itself without any share of them in the impressions of the body.
Right. So the word here for without any share is sundoxatsein. So not sharing any opinions with the body. So again, this idea that, of course, you're still feeling pleasure and pain and you're still having perceptions, but you don't let those things tell you if things are good or bad or true or false.
Mhm. As for its temperance, yeah, the soul's temperance, because it's not associated with the lower part, not even feeling in moderation, right? That was the difference between purificatory temperance and political temperance.
Right.
But absolutely and in every way devoid of feeling. Its fortitude consisted not in not being afraid when departing from the body. That's that's temperance, and fortitude, courage, is about not being afraid of death. And as mind and reason were his guide, the inferior faculties offering no resistance to purificatory justice. That's the justice part. The whole of his life was perfectly regulated.
Right. You'll see that. So you mentioned fortitude, justice, and temperance here. He didn't mention wisdom. Maybe he takes the previous things about the hymns and so on to be the his purificatory wisdom, properly speaking. Or no, it's the thinking. Um, right, the thinking here at the beginning. That's phronane. So it's cognate with phronesis. So it's
Mm.
that's the wisdom. That's the purificatory practical wisdom. So in this chapter, we have the four cardinal virtues in the purificatory form and how he had all of them.
Hmm. Okay.
Um, so, um, and now, well, that concludes the part about the purificatory virtues. And we can now go on to the um, contemplative virtues, which start here on paragraph 22 and go on for four paragraphs.
Okay. So 22. Having virtues of this kind, so the purificatory ones, he advanced painlessly and smoothly, and as if it were by the steps of initiation, and ascended to those that are greater and above these, being led on by a natural rectitude and skillful pedagogy.
Okay, so here there's this idea of being led uh, up, being led in some kind of pedagogy. Remember, like Eros leads the soul up the scale of of loves in of beauty in the symposium. There's also this idea of lesser mysteries and greater mysteries that we've seen in um, him already used with regard to Aristotle and Plato. But also there's this idea like so he just went through the purification and now he goes to the contemplation. Just as in a mystery, you first purify yourself, and then there's the moment where you see the sacred things. You see the mystery that you can't talk about. Um, and and so that's the thing. And again, he advanced painlessly and smoothly, so emphasizing that he's not jumping any steps, right? He goes from one thing to another, and that's yeah. So I mean, Proclus seems to have Proclus has this part in the I mentioned this when we were talking about Typhon and Christianity in the Parmenides commentary about how if you skip things, then evil diamonds attract you to matter. And I suggested that might be what he thinks kind of happens to Christians because they try to go directly to the highest. And I also wonder whether part of this presentation of Proclus going step by step might be because he might have a different reputation, right? Because he might have had a reputation of like a boy wonder. Because you see parts of this idea in Marinus's life about how he reads through Aristotle so quickly and he becomes Syrianus's top student and things like that. And so maybe there was, an impression that some people had of this person went too fast. This person, there must be something, not quite right with Proclus because he didn't spend the right amount of time practicing, studying and he became too soon the head of the Platonic Academy. So maybe because of this kind of gossip, it's important for Marinus to stress that it's all smooth.
Mhm.
So,
Okay. But this is how, I mean, these steps don't have, I mean, there isn't like a list of how much time it has to take or something. They're not.
no, we don't find anything like that. But you can imagine that since the Platonic worldview is all about, praxis, order, hierarchy, mediation, and so on, maybe there is this expectation, right? Even if we don't have any text that says you have to spend so much time doing this and that, maybe there's
Mm.
this idea.
Okay. 4. Having already been purified and mastering generation, and looking down on the aspirants within the world of generation, he became an adept in the foremost things, and became a personal witness of the truly blessed sights in that place. No longer,
Right.
well, there's a lot of things.
Um, yeah, let's pause here. So yeah, so he became purified and mastered generation, the world of generation. Um, right. And um the that's interesting. The translator here suggests that mastering generation might be, already going through that process that we talked about where you identify with yourself with your daimon, or you exchange your daimon for a god. Um, and I think that might be reading too much into it. Here he just says going beyond generation. But what is truly interesting here is the aspirants. The aspirants is literally here those who carry the narthex, those who carry the thirst, and so that goes back to Plato's Phaedo, right? In the Phaedo, um, Socrates says, many are those who carry the thyrsus, but few are actually backups, right? And then he's talking about, like how only few are true philosophers. And so here he's saying, he's a true philosopher. He's not just someone as it were, participating in the rites for show. Um, and this the blessed sites in that place. So in that place, Eke, the traditional Platonian way of talking about the intelligible world, there, and also the thing of the blessed sites that's uh similar to what's how Plato describes the souls in the Phaedrus, that they're up there in heaven seeing the blessed sights. So there's, he's paralleling all these uh all these Platonic things. Um the right. You can
Okay, and then no longer gaining knowledge of them by discursive and demonstrative reasonings, but as if by vision beholding the paradigms in the divine mind, by simple strokes of intellectual energy.
right. So that's a bit Thomas Taylor-esque, using energy. But yeah, so the divine mind here is nous, right? So these are the models in nous. And so he's talking about how the noesis of Proclus, he no longer reasons his way to things, but has just insights, aha moments where he understands things. Um, and right, so that is presumably what it's this kind of aha, this kind of intellectual understanding that doesn't come through study and reasoning, that is somehow made possible when you practice purifying virtue enough. And that's the idea. Um, yeah, we can continue.
So to this he added virtue, to which one could not properly give the name of practical reason, but will rather style wisdom, or else by some more dignified appellation.
Right. So it's no longer Phronesis, it's Sophia. That's the that's also a change that we saw when in Porphyry's text. When Porphyry discusses the contemplative virtue, he no longer calls it Phronesis. Right. He calls it Sophia.
Um, in accord with this, the philosopher easily penetrated the whole theology of the Greeks and the barbarians, clouded as it was by mythical fictions, and brought it to light for those who were willing and able to follow, and expounding everything in an inspired manner and bringing it into harmony.
Right. So here I take this as an explanation of what that wisdom is, right? Because he just talked about the name previously. And so here it seems to be the ability to understand what is, to interpret Homer and other texts allegorically, right? That's that's the thing. So it's what we saw when we read the fifth and sixth, especially the sixth essay. That seems to be uh, mhm, uh, the idea here.
Um, those are willing to follow planning. Yeah, he went through all the treatises of his predecessors, and if anything in them was sound, he made critical use of it. But if he found anything worthless, he rejected this entirely as an absurdity. And if anything was contrary to good principles, he refuted it polemically and with severe examination.
Right. This seems to be now moving on to a different subject, which is his activity as a teacher. Right. And again, since he has this wisdom, he can recognize what's true and what's false in his predecessors.
Mm. Seminars, he dealt with each point ably and clearly and wrote everything down in treatises. So immense was his love of labor that he expanded 5 topics, sometimes even more in the course of a day, and generally wrote about 700 lines.
Right. This is the thing that always really impresses, well, has always really impressed everyone. It is a very impressive data, and Marinus might be, exaggerating, but as we mentioned last class, we should take into account that Proclus observed many holy days where presumably he would not be able to work.
Um, what is 5 topics?
I think the idea is that he could teach 5 different issues, like 5 topics. That's it, yeah.
So something like having different courses going on at
Having
once.
different courses going on, exactly. Um, yeah.
Okay. Um, he also conferred with the other philosophers, taking the initiative, and in evening held further seminars that were not written up.
Right. Um, yeah. So many commentaries, like the commentaries that we have from Proclus, like the Parmenides and the Timaeus, they don't seem to be lecture notes. He wrote them. However, the commentary on the Cratylus, for instance, and the later commentaries that we have on the Phaedo by Olympiodorus and Damascus, those seem to be lecture notes, right? So there are seminars that are written up and some that are not. And um, and uh, okay,
And all this after the nocturnal and unsleeping worship of his, after his obeisance to the rising midday and setting sun.
right. So this, emphasize again that all this work, all this activity takes place together with his rigid ritual schedule. And of course, the just unsleeping here is not to be taken literally that he never slept, but just that he did, he also worshipped at night, and I mean, occasionally he may have taken up vigils, but that was not always the case.
Okay, and he himself became the father of many doctrines, physical, intellectual, and those that are even more divine, meaning the theology
Right.
or something.
No, so first off, I'm not really clear about why it says physical here, because the Greek is actually psychikon. So it's actually relative to the soul, relative to nous, and relative to the gods, right? So
Um,
he innovated it in all three. And and this is important in the sense because on the one hand, in ancient in antiquity, we see very often this idea that new things are bad and novelty is bad. You should only preserve what's been handed down and so on. But here we find Proclus we find Proclus being praised for being very creative, but also in the previous thing when it says that that he he critically reviewed what his predecessors, what the ancients wrote. It's also that. So here there's it's an interesting uh, um, uh, difference.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, like going through would be like modeled like Aristotle does, where it's like there's all these lists of like
Exactly.
what everyone said, and this is how they're wrong and how they're right.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's something like in the Parmenides commentary, Proclus does that a little bit. In the Timaeus commentary, he does it a lot. He gives lots of names.
Um, okay. Four, and there's some of his new doctrines. This man was
Yes.
the first to teach that there's a kind of souls they're able to see many forms at once, which he quite reasonably assigned to a middle place between the mind, which simultaneously and in one stroke considers everything, and the soul that makes progress from one form to another.
Right. It's really curious that this is his big novelty. So also with regard to the idea that he innovates, that's actually an important datum because if you just read Proclus, you might get the impression that he gets everything from Syrianus, right? And because all the time it's he presents all the past opinions, and then he said, oh, but Syrianus said this, and then he just sticks with that. Occasionally he'll say something like, but if I have to add my own opinion, something like that, but it's rare. And now specifically what this doctrine of the souls that that contemplate many forms at once. I actually just published a Substack about this yesterday. So you can read about that later, but I'll just summarize it here. This is a doctrine that we find mentioned in the Timaeus commentary, although there it seems kind of hypothetical. It's not entirely sure. It seems like something that is investigating. Here in Marinus, it seems like it's something that's definitely he espoused, and he talks about it in Platonic Theology, Book 6, right? So in um, in the elements of theology, he does talk about the hypercosmic, and then he says like the gods are all those gods are hypercosmic, which participate in constituting unparticipated soul, right? And that's what he calls hypercosmic there. In the Platonic theology, he combines that with he has a more complicated account which involves two levels called the hypercosmic and the hypercosmic and encosmic. And he also brings in the gods of the Phaedrus and the fates and necessity that show up in the myth of to explain all this. So it seems that it was an important part of his system. It seems that it was something that he saw that was necessary to account for not only like what soul is, but more particularly how it is that there's like this multitude of lives, of possible lives that we get to pick from. It seems to be part of like that that the multitude of possible lives isn't something that depends on the circumstances of the world, but rather is something that depends on the nature of soul itself. So that seems to be where this doctrine fits in. It is weird that this is what Marinus picks. Maybe it's because indeed most of the doctrines that we associate with Proclus were actually from Syrianus. And we can see this in the fact that Damascus often treats them as a unit. He'll often say the philosophers say, and he means Syrianus and Proclus. This is because, this is especially in the commentary on the Parmenides by Damascus, which is actually a super commentary, right? It's a commentary on Proclus's commentary on the Parmenides, right? And there he seems to treat both of their opinions as the same.
This
Um,
whole thing would be like a classic, like Brackley like making one more level for like instead of having there'd just be like this soul, which is thinking in time, discursively, and then like Luz, which is seeing everything at once. There's also something in between.
Yeah, I mean that's part of it. And the way I understand this is that the this thing in between is that these souls they live many parallel lives, right? So these lives they're not all in one single like ordered in one single time stream, like all the lives of souls here.
Hmm.
So that's why it's also, it's a really clear case where, using the word soul is not exactly correct because it's not that these are schizophrenic, right? That they're leading these different lives in parallel without connection. Rather, these are psyche in sense of they're sources of life and they sustain many lives in parallel. And since they're in parallel, they're not in time, but since they're lives, they do have beginning, middle, and end. So they're not nous. So that's why I associate it with the realm of all possible lives, right? And that's also the gods that are involved there. There's the gods of the Phaedrus, right? They are the ones that show the possible lives for human beings, like you're a soul of Ares, or you're a soul of Athena, or you're a soul of Zeus. And also the Fates in the myth of Ur, um, they distribute the possible lives to the souls. So yeah, I mean, part of it is using the law of middle terms, but it's using the law of middle terms to you know to fill up a different problem. It's not just the mediators for mediators' sake.
Right. The problem being that there's some kind of source or possibility for one soul to have many lives or many different kind of lives.
Yeah, one soul can have many different kinds of life, and so like, why is choosing lives important? Choosing lives is what makes Proclus not a Stoic. So the Stoics think that the whole world is a single organism, and therefore everything in the world fulfills a certain function within this living being. And that would make it seem that you are fulfilling a necessary function in the world, and therefore you have to be doing what you're doing. Proclus says, no, there are necessary functions in the world. However, you chose which function you're going to fulfill because you could have chosen something else and someone else would have chosen that function. So the idea that there are these possible lives and that they don't depend on the world, these gods are prior to the gods in the world, is something that can let him maintain organic unity of the world and also freedom. Right. That's the idea.
Right. So you need to have like a higher beginning for the soul or for the life of this that you live in order to preserve some kind of choice. So that
Exactly. Yeah, and that's like a theme that you find also in the Chaldean oracles. Of course, in the Chaldean oracles, it's not, as developed and systematic, but there's also this the Chaldean oracles really emphasize that the source of souls is something beyond the world, right? And that seems to be part because what the initiations and the rites of the Chaldean oracles are meant to do is to free you from this world. And you can't do that if the highest soul is the world soul.
let's see. Okay. Um, okay. Where are we? Oh, and one who wishes can encounter the rest of his offspring by approaching his work, which in present case I declined to do so as not to prolong my account by enumerating everything. So it's like I could have written this like preface to all of Proclus thoughts, then it would be a different book, or something like that. Um,
Right. And I guess he's apologizing also, like, because this is what the time Porphyry does. Right? Porphyry gives us the complete list of Plotinus's works.
Mm.
But I guess Marinus is saying, well, I'm not doing that here. I'm not going to give you the complete works, which is a
And
shame. We would have loved to have that list. Yeah.
and one who encounters them will know that the whole of the foregoing narrative concerning him is true. And all the more so if anyone has seen him and enjoyed the spectacle of him. Hearing his exposition and delivery of the most exquisite discourses, as year by year celebrate the festivals of Plato and Socrates.
Right. So, enjoy the spectacle of him. Remember all that stuff at the beginning about how he was beautiful, how he radiated, had some special light about him. And this stuff about celebrating festivals for Plato and Socrates, that's also shows up in the Life of Plotinus, where there's like competitions of speech giving on these days. Hmm.
Right. Um, for it seemed like that he spoke under divine inspiration, and the worlds truly fell like snow from that wise man's mouth. Okay, this is back to his like physical description though. For his eyes of charisma, for his eyes seem to be filled with a sort of brilliance, and the rest of his visage has a sheer of divine illumination.
Right. Yeah, it's back to this thing that you would think is like natural virtue, but I guess here the idea is that it's about him as a teacher specifically, and that's why it's here in the contemplative virtues. And um yeah, and it somehow has to do with this um with this contemplative virtue that he now has of being able to just have these insights into intelligible things.
Um, Once in the course
That's
of his exposition, um, a man called Rufinus, one of the most conspicuous figures in politics, um, I don't know what that is, um, a truthful person, otherwise worthy of respect, saw a light playing around his head. And then reached the end of his exposition, Rufinus stood up, made an obeisance, and testified an oath to the divine vision.
great. So here I mean, Rufinus is some famous politician. I don't think that we have more information about him. Um, and there's just this, so, he just tells us this episode of seeing like a halo around Proclus's head, and Rufinus testifies that he did that like, with no.
Okay. It was this Rufinus who sent him a large amount of gold at the time when the Christ set back and they returned from Asia. This gift, however, practice regarded with disdain and on no account consent to accept it.
Right. So there was the time when he went to Asia, and probably because of Christian pressures, it was unclear. Those the vultures, the typhonic people. And so he comes back and he gets a large amount of gold offered by Rufinus, but he did not accept it. Again, this is an an example of this is actually an example of two things. This is for Proclus, it's an example of how he doesn't care about material things and that doesn't want to tie him to politics. On Rufinus's part, it shows a an Athenian or an aristocrat who wants to keep up local cults, right? So there's no longer any, state sponsorship. And so it's the local wealthy people who have to, if they're pagan, to maintain the local cults. And and this is like Rufinus doing it. Remember, like, because the Platonic Academy, as we saw, was a place where lots of rites and prayers happened. So it would have been a way of sustaining, of you being a pious aristocrat and sustaining it. Um, the I guess this is also maybe this is just also all a bit too much for Proclus. This person who says, "Oh, I saw a halo around your head," and then wants to give you a huge donation. There's you don't. Some people can seem that they're coming too close and things like that. Yeah,
It's a weird story. I don't know.
it's
And if you
it's
saw it,
terrible.
like, why do you have to swear to everyone that you saw it? Who cares?
Oh well, I know the
I mean, or
swearing
that's
makes
like,
sense. Like it's I mean, it can seem showy, I guess, but I guess it's also something like how else do you know, how do you make um your witness more credible? You know?
mm, yeah, I mean, for Marinus to quote it makes sense. 'Cause, like, but there's still a question like why this guy would like, I don't know. It's also like whenever someone does something like this, it's also a witness to how great he is because he saw it.
Yeah, and yeah, yeah. That's part of the things that would be maybe make you uncomfortable about such a person. Yeah, especially if they're a politician.
But I mean, before let us return to
Oh,
our
but
original time. Did I finish? Yeah.
you, you know, no, but precisely. But let us return to our original design. Marinus himself has recognized that he's gone off topic. Right? Yeah.
Okay. Now that we have already recounted, even if not at adequate length, the fact about his contemplative wisdom, the next thing to be spoken of is the justice commensurate with virtues of this kind. Okay. So we have to enumerate the virtues now. For this no longer exists in a number of parts as the ones preceding do, nor in the consent in a number of parts, nor in the consent of one with another. But nonetheless, this too is defined in itself as doing one's own, and is clear to the rational soul. Hmm.
Right. So, um, uh, again, rational justice or political justice is, each of the parts of the soul doing what they're supposed to. The purificatory justice is the other parts of the soul just obeying the rational part, not any more doing their own thing, but rather following what the rational does because it's superior. And now this one is not even has nothing to do with the other parts, but is just the rational soul doing what's proper to it. Right.
Right? So it's sort of by itself, entirely separately.
Yeah.
Notice be clear to it is nothing else than to work in accord with mind and God,
Right. Nous and theos.
which the philosopher also did in an eminent degree. And four, he scarcely took a break from his daily labors, and if occasionally he did, resigned his body to sleep. Perhaps even then he did not refrain from thinking.
Right. Remember, there's similar praise of Plotinus, how he slept so lightly, and this is an example of how his mind was always active.
Nevertheless, there were times when he quickly cast this off as a sort of idleness of the soul, and since the night was not far gone and the hour of prayer did not yet beckon, I don't know when that hour is, being by himself on the bed, he either composed hymns or examined doctrines and found solutions, and then rose at day and wrote them up.
Right. I think it's the hour of prayer. We've seen that he prayed to sunrise. So sometimes he would wake up in bed. However, it was too soon for morning prayer. So he stays in bed and he thinks of, and presumably for some reason, he can't write yet either. So he just stays in bed, thinking up, like writing, composing hymns in his mind, or thinking about philosophical problems, waiting for sunrise to happen so he can go pray and then write down what he's thought of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, in addition, so this is the question of justice, which is like he's just giving examples of just thinking and not doing anything else, like sleeping and other things.
Indeed. Yeah, that's supposed to be what justice is here. Um, it's in a sense, you can think of it still as a relational property, but it's no longer the rational soul commanding the lower things, but rather it's that his rational soul is always paying attention to the higher things, right? In that sense.
Um, in addition, 25, he possessed the temperance that corresponds to this. And what's the temperance? This is the inward reversion of the soul to the mind.
The
A state,
nous.
uh, right? A state in which it cannot be impinged or distracted by anything else.
Again, it's hard to see how this is
They
distinct from the
become all the same
justice
thing,
section.
right? We already saw that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
To these, he added the imperfection and not the concomitant fortitude, desiring the impassibility of that which he beheld, desiring the impassibility of that which he beheld, this being itself impassible by nature, and living entirely, as Plotinus says, not the human life of the good man, which political virtue thinks proper to live, but leaving this behind and exchanging it for another, which is that of the gods, for it was their likeness, not that of good men, that he was attaining.
Right. In all this, I guess what's clear is like if you're not paying attention, if you're like, if you're not even sleeping properly, um, then there's an idea here that, he's no longer acting as a soul, as a psyche, as what gives life to the body, right? But it's really he's acting as what follows the higher things, nous and God. Um, and yeah, so here he's gone through temperance, fortitude as well, wisdom, and also justice. So these are the four um, cardinal virtues in the contemplative mode.
Okay. Let's continue a little. 24, 25, 26. And these were the virtues that marked his life while he was still a student with Syrianus and working through the compositions of the older writers. So now,
Right.
um, as for the
So,
sure,
right, this is also working through in the sense of, revising his predecessors and accepting what was good and bad, and rejecting what was bad, and so on.
as for the Orphic and Chaldean theology, he received certain rudiments and as if it were seeds of them from his master, not having managed to engage him in verbal discussions of them.
Right. It seems that so he's going to talk about how he didn't have a proper, class on on Orphic theology and on the Chaldean oracles with.
The reason was that Syrianus had before him, and Dominius, the Syrian philosopher, was also a successor. Um, the task of expounding one of these, either the works of Orpheus or the oracles, and left it open to them to choose the alternative. But they did not concur and did not both choose the same things. Dominius choosing the works of Orpheus, while our philosophers chose the oracles. Then, so they were like supposed to start working on this. The expedition of these, however, was prevented by the fact that the great Syrianus did not survive very long. He thus, as I said, received his first instruction from the master, and his way carefully studied the commentaries on Orpheus, together with the voluminous works of Porphyry and Neoplatonic, on the oracles and on the concomitant writings of the Chaldeans.
So just read the one more line and I'll comment.
Nourished also by the divine oracles, he ascended rapidly to the height of virtue in relation to the human soul, which they inspired the Adlichus style in his sublime matter, the theurgic ones.
Okay, so this is about, so he's moving from contemplative to theurgic virtues. And the theurgic virtues then seem to be things, and so he marks off the contemplative virtues when he says, and these were the virtues that marked his life while he was still a student with Syrianus. However, the theurgic virtues are things he only develops after Syrianus's death. And in part because of this occasion that he did not get an instruction in theurgy. Now, what's interesting is that this instruction could have happened with the Chaldean oracles, and that's what theurgy is usually associated with. But it could have happened also by studying Orpheus, right? And so but they didn't get. Now, it's interesting this thing about that the Syrian philosopher who was also a successor, right? So it seems that this um, Dominus would have also been possibly a successor to Syrianus, right? But we know that Proclus didn't that didn't happen. Proclus succeeded Syrianus. It seems that um, Proclus, like from Damascus, we know that there was some kind of discussion between the two, and Proclus corrected Dominus. So Dominus recognized that he wasn't as good as the philosophers. Um, Now there's so after um he Syrianus's death is that he studies these. Now, why would these be specifically the new heights of virtue, right, than the contemplative ones? So in the contemplative ones, we already saw stuff about dealing with myths, right? Acting in accord with this, the philosopher easily penetrated the whole theology of Greeks and of barbarians, clouded as it was by mythical fictions, and brought it to light for those who are willing and able to follow it, expounding everything in an inspired manner and spurring it into harmony. So there it seems to be like what we saw with regard to Homer, finding allegorical interpretations for things, um, under reading these texts and understanding that the things that seem to be about God's changing or doing evil are actually symbols of other things, and therefore you can bring everything into harmony. Or also say, clashes between different mythic accounts that you solve by saying, oh, it's just, it's two different gods with the same name or something like that. Now these divine oracles, they're also texts. However, they're texts that teach you, for instance, how to escape the world, how to escape the body, how to purify yourself. So more than understanding, studying these texts is about getting a certain learning certain practical abilities about how not just to contemplate the gods and imitate them and live like a god by always thinking, but rather by acting acting together with them by purifying people and so on.
Mm.
Right.
Right. So, and there's something like where like he didn't like there's theoretic virtues and there's like this study of theurgy, I guess, which are sort of assumed to be the same thing here.
Indeed, it seems like there's the same they go together here. Um um yeah. It's also interesting that he's distinguishing here oracles from mythology, because he talked about mythology in the last thing. And those are distinct, for instance, in the Phaedrus. In the Phaedrus, it's two different kinds of madness. There's poetic madness, and there's also the madness of Apollo. That's the one that makes you that gives or that makes you an oracle. And it seems here so that there's that the oracle is something more. It's not just a text. It's maybe like a command That's perhaps the distinction. This word oracle, logia, is also what Philo and the New Testament use when they need a word to refer to the scriptures. Right? They say the logia, the oracles. Um, so that for what it's worth.
Then, and it's interesting somehow that he didn't get this teaching really from his teacher. Somehow, only started.
Yeah. Yeah, and this thing about receiving seeds. Proclus has this theory about that there are two kinds of knowledge or two kinds of learning in the soul. That one he calls, if I remember, it's something like I think they're called like learning and discovery. And so like one is from outside and so that's learning and it can be in two ways. You can learn from inferior things from perception or you can learn from higher things, inspiration. And there's also discovery where you unfold the logoi in you. So the logoi are like seeds. And he talks about this in the Republic, right? In the Republic, there's the question about like why does the city fall? And it seems that they can't calculate this number. And Proclus says, well, in his commentary says, well, it's because they didn't know the proper astrological rules. And then he imagines an objection. If these astrological rules were so important, why didn't Plato include them in the Republic? And he says, well, the gods left that as something for the guardians themselves to develop,
Hmm.
right? And so they just gave the seeds and they left it, gave it something for themselves to develop. And so here as well, there seems to be, there's the stuff that he received from outside, from Syrianus, and from reading the texts. But the Orphic and Chaldean theology, this is something that he gave birth to. That's like really interesting because this is, as it were, this would be like the ritual part of his philosophy, the religious part. And this is the stuff that he himself, developed on his own and didn't receive from someone else. And again, this like matches the idea like about, this praise of innovation that we find in this biography. That's very interesting. And this idea that there are seeds also agrees. So um, uh, Proclus, as he's going to comment in a bit, Proclus wrote a text on the Chaldean oracles, and we only have fragments of this. It's stuff that Psellus quotes, and so and what's interesting there is that he says one of the fragments says that, well, the philosophers say that the soul, um, I think it's like the soul is unhappy because it has forgotten the forms, but it can remember them because it has all the logoi inside it. The theurgists, however, say that it is because they have lost connection with the gods, but they can reconnect with them because they have all the synthemata, all the divine symbols inside the soul. And and so there's also within at least in Proclus's reading of the Chaldean oracles, this idea of these seeds in the soul that can be developed.
Okay. Let me see. Uh, so there might be something like that. It needs to be like you need to I don't know if you would need like in some weird way the most traditional part of the philosophy needs to be the most independently or like recreated in each soul. Like you need to like if theurgy is some kind of contact with the god, then there isn't it's not really something that you can be taught. You sort of have to do it, which means you have to have your own oracle or something like that.
Well, that's I mean you can say that then for all philosophy as well, so far as philosophy is Mises,
All right.
yeah. Yeah. But it is true. You could think that. And again, why does this come after the contemplative virtues? Presumably because I mean we've seen that, already in the purificatory virtues, he's talked about his religious life. Um, and it seemed that he already, learned some practice of piety from Hero, the mathematician. So presumably this reflects Iamblichus's idea that you have to be perfect already in contemplation in order for theurgy to join you to the gods, right? So we saw that, other parts of the Mystery suggest that no, each person does the ritual that's proper to their station, but Book 2, Chapter 11 gave this idea that theurgy is one step above contemplation. Right.
Right. Okay. I'm bringing so right back here. So he did these things, and I'm bringing together the exegesis of previous philosophers. He worked on them with due discrimination and quoted the other Chaldean treatises and chief commentaries up with the God-given oracles, taking 5 whole years to complete this task.
Yeah. The not really clear what the significance is. I mean, 5 is a number associated with justice. That's probably what one thing that Marinus has in mind to emphasize that it took him 5 years. But otherwise, this is how we see Proclus working. He reads the previous philosophers and he uses their commentaries when he's discussing a text and so on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now,
The the other Chaldean treatises is because besides the Chaldean oracles, there were other texts attributed to Julian and his father, who were the people who transmitted the Chaldean oracles or received them. So they also, besides having these oracles, they also produced these books.
mhm. Now, in connection with this, he saw the following vision. It seemed to him that the great Plutarch was telling him in a dream that the number of years he would live was going to be equal to the number of tetrads that he composed on the oracles. Now, when he counted them, he found that there were 70 of them. That's a lot.
Yeah, the tetrad is interesting, right? Because it suggests that he maybe composed this in verse, in groups of four, sets of 4 verses. And that's not what we have in his commentary on the Chaldean oracles. Um, let me just yeah, they're quaternion, yeah, they're tetrad. So this is a lost text, it seems. Uh, yeah. Um, let me just. Oh, oh no, it can the tech that can also mean a a text that um takes 4 pages, right? I'm seeing here in the French notes. So it's not necessarily poetic work. So it could be the text that we have fragments of.
Um, Now, okay, this was indeed a divine dream. This was indeed the divine dream was apparent from what occurred near the end of his life. For he lived, as I have said above, 70 years and the further 5. We discussed something about the number not being accurate, I don't remember.
Indeed. It's yeah, it's because he seemed to have lived 73 to the age of 73. So that means that he lived until his 74th year. And the way to make this work is that you count from 0 to 70, and then you count 70, 71, 72, 73, 74. And that makes 5. So in that sense, that's the way that that's the sense that he lived 75 years.
Okay, now, but during these 5 was no longer in good health, for that intolerably harsh diet of his, together with his frequent ablutions and other such austerities, as fatigued his body, despite its natural advantages. Okay. A lot of apology here, and began to fail after 70th year, becoming debilitated in all his activities. For though, even in this condition, he prayed, composed hymns, and wrote a few things, as well as associated with his companions, he did all these things more weakly. Therefore, he recalled his dream with astonishment and kept on saying that he lived only 70 years.
Right. So yeah, so he only lived 70 years. So after the moment of, so he lived, so those 5 last years when he was 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, he was sick. And that's how you get 70 plus 5.
Hmm.
Um, and and right, and so this is, became a prophetic, you recognize that this was a prophetic dream, and uh, that is, yeah. And also again, the great Plutarch was the man who took him in, was like his first teacher in Athens, with whom he read the Phaedo about the immortality of the soul. So not coincidence that this man should tell him how long he will live.
Now, for though, yeah. Therefore, when he was in a weak condition, I like this. Like, since he was weak, that was like he wasn't really alive. So, like, he lived for 70 years, and that was fine. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, and also remember that this is the period that Marinus talked about before, when he was really sick and bad, and people would just come and sing hymns and talk with him, and he would remember everything that was said in these chants and so on, in these conversations, but about his day-to-day life, he would remember things. And that's an example of purifying virtue, which is an example of separating from the body. So maybe that's also a sense in which, he wasn't alive, he wasn't uh, there for his body anymore. I guess that's the idea.
Now, when he was in this weak condition, his passion for exegesis was stirred above all by the young Hygieus, a man from his adolescence, who from his adolescence was a brilliant pattern of all his ancestors' virtue of the golden chain of descent that led back to Solon.
Right. This is just a we know some things about this Hygieus, but we don't really have any texts from him. But anyway, it seems like even during when he was in these last days, when he was sick, this Hygieus would visit him to still be taught about texts.
Mhm. Okay, and he attended Proclus solicitously in his exposition of Platonic and other theologies. And the old man kept handling his writings to him and was filled with joy when he saw the youth progressing step by step in each of his studies. Okay. I don't know how this is connected to what we're talking about, though. Just that there was this young man that he still sort of somewhat studied with when he was sick or something. Um,
Mm, yeah, it seems like he's going off topic again. The Yeah, and then yeah, I think that's he presumably maybe he studied also the Chaldean oracles with this man, but I don't know.
okay, and this is a superficial account of his lucubrations on the Chaldean writings.
Right, his elaborations on the Chaldean texts. Right. Okay. Well, now it's already 25. Shall we stop here and continue next week?
So,
So, yeah. So now there's going to be he's going to continue on the stuff about theurgic virtue, some stuff about um Orpheus, visions he had, miracles he did, and things like that. And and then it'll end with his death. But anyway, yeah, I think this is giving us like a more concrete idea of what the ideal life is supposed to have been like, right, for this theory of virtue. Um, and then once we're done with Marinus, we'll get back to more philosophical texts like Hermias and Damascus on the virtues. Okay, next week, are we good?
I think so, yeah. Should be.
26th? Okay,
Yeah, should be good. Okay.
great. And
See you.
yeah, see you. Have a great
Maybe
week.
I'll do something with the whole Substack thing with the how many gods they're the same or not or something.
Uh, yeah. Oh, right. There's the whole Substack debate with Butler, which you can catch up on, and also yesterday the thing about
That.
the hypercosmic souls you can read.
Mm.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Okay.
See you. Bye.